I'm going to give you a snapshot of the Elver fishery, and I'm going to kind of mix in some discussion about eel management as a whole, because Elvers are a small part of the overall management for American eel. When I put this slide together, for some reason it didn't save it, but I had a quote here from Lieutenant Rene Cloutier on this slide. So I'm going to have to paraphrase his quote since I don't have it in writing now, but it basically said the Elver fishery is the only fishery that you can work for 10 weeks with a butterfly net and make $100,000. And so that's not true across the board, obviously, but it certainly has been the case for a few lucky people that that hit the runs just right. So, did I go the wrong way? Now, so just talk quickly about the range of American eel. So in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you see the southern tip of Greenland, and American eel range from Greenland all the way down through to the northern top of South America. So quite an extensive range for this species. As far as the life cycle, they have a very unique life cycle. When we think about species in main rivers that are diadromous species within main rivers, you think about salmon and alewives, which are anadromous, which spawn in the freshwater and spend most of their life cycle in the estuarine or in the ocean environments. And with American eel, they're a catadromous species, so they spawn in the ocean and spend most of their life cycle within our freshwater environment. So they spawn actually in the Sargasso Sea, quite a ways away. And then the larvae, then the eggs turn into larvae, of course, and then the what we call the ribbon stage of the eel, the larval stage of the eel, is distributed along the entire coast throughout its range, turning into glass eels, what we refer to as Elvers, but it's really a glass eel stage. And then those glass eels have the ability to swim and then start moving up the rivers. So I'm just going to touch on some management history here. The American eel, the overall management for American eel is done by the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission. They approved their first fisheries management plan back in 1999. The board has since initiated Addendum 2 back in 2006, which focused really on silver eels, dealing with their spawning migration with the intent of halting the further decline in the juveniles. We were seeing back in those early 2000s and mid 2000s, we were seeing a continued decline in recruitment. So this action was thought to help reverse that decline. And then in 2008, the board delayed management on the addendum in order to incorporate the results of the stock assessment. And a full stock assessment was completed in 2012, and the stock assessment found the American eel population in the U.S. is depleted. Doesn't say that overfishing is occurring, doesn't say that it's overfished, just that it is depleted. So depleted, the term, and the generic term of depleted, means a lot of things, different things to a lot of different people, but at the commission, we define the definition is defined as reflects low levels of abundance, though it is unclear whether fishing mortality is a primary cause for the reduced stock size. So the fishing issues that we continue to talk about related to American eel remain one of the threats, one of the directed mortalities associated with the species in all life stages. However, if you look at other major threats, and I've just listed one here, one of the major issues becomes passage issues, both upstream and downstream passage issues throughout its range. Hydropower in particular is very devastating to the out-migrating silver eels in the fall. And so the Department of Marine Resources does a tremendous amount through our regulatory work to ensure that hydro facilities provide adequate downstream passage. The big problem with that is it's not a one-size-fits-all situation, because every hydropower facility is different. So you just can't say you need this certain bar spacing for racks, you just need this certain flow at certain times. On the Presumpscot, we actually negotiated a complete shutdown for periods depending on moon phase and timing of run. So they actually have to shut their turbines down. In other places, we know that by putting diversionary racks in place, we can actually move the adult eels away from the turbines. So that becomes a very effective way. So there's a lot of different issues going on. But again, I see these issues of fish passage as being one of the major threats that we face with all life stages of eel. The upstream passage, it is amazing. I was looking for some photography this morning, and I wish I could find it, but dams, hydropower, non-hydropower, any of these obstructions that are in place when the Elvers come in the spring, it is amazing to see what an Elver can go over. Before the Fort Halifax Dam was removed, it was one area of the dam was roughly 30 feet high with a thin coat of water coming over it. And it wasn't completely vertical, but there was a slight incline, but it was only a few degrees. And one evening, I probably watched upwards of 200,000 to 300,000 eels just go right up over the top of it. And as long as it was wet, they could move over the top of it. So upstream passage barriers can be a problem, but as long as there is some level of moisture, they can move over very tough obstacles. I'm going to talk a little bit about trends and with Young of the Year. But if you remember back in 08, through that 08 and 010 period, the idea was to focus on, the 06 period, 2006, the focus was to try to ensure that we improved the outstream migration, lessen the mortality on silver eels to improve recruitment. Now, these are very long-lived critters. So in Maine, because of the cold water, it is not unexpected to see a silver eel out migrating to go spawn at the age of 20 to 25 years old or even older. And the colder the water, the older they are before they out migrate. In the mid-Atlantic, that same eel may be in the range of 10 to 12 years old before they go into a silver stage. So it's very water temperature dependent. But in the case of the focus on recruitment, each state is required by the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission to do a Young of the Year trend or Young of the Year assessment to determine trends. And here you can see, based on the work that we do in Booth Bay Harbor at West Harbor Pond, is where we do our assessment work. You can see from 2000 up until 2013, a lot of variability in that trend, but with some increasing production starting in 2011 right up through until 2013, and we see again in 2014 some very good recruitment, Young of the Year recruitment. If I showed you the same graph for all of the other states, you would see that same sort of variability within the runs. So there is always an argument between is it stable or is it not. I think we are seeing some trends that show there is some stability within the population, which definitely relates to how we think about future management actions. This slide reflects the yellow eel harvest, so that stage between glass eels or Elvers and silver eels. As you can see, a tremendous amount of variability in landings over a period of time from 1950 until 2012. You can see a lot of variability in value, but don't look at that value line as having any reflection to the Elver fishery. That's the Elver value. I'll show you in just a minute. This trend, I think, reflects a longer-term set of data that the department has that shows, again, a lot of variability in harvest, but it's definitely driven by the value of the eel. The yellow eel stage, because there's been so many glass eels that have been harvested over the last 4 or 5 years and shipped to Japan, China, and Korea, that their ponds are basically full. They are growing out a tremendous amount of yellow eels for the food market. That has depressed the yellow eel market and demand within the United States. But what we are seeing, even though we're seeing a decline in the harvest levels within, especially New England, we're seeing quite an increase in harvest levels, even though the value is not there and the demand is not there. The Mid-Atlantic states, specifically Maryland and Virginia, are showing quite an increase of harvest within the Chesapeake Bay, some going to food markets, some going to the bait markets for sport fishing. There's a lot of things going on within management right now, and the other is an Endangered Species Act petition that was submitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2010. This is the second petition that they have received in the last 12 years to list the American eel. 5 factors on which their listing is considered includes the present and threatening destruction, modification, or curtailment of habitat. So that's that passage issue that I talked to earlier. And next is the overutilization of the species for commercial, recreation, scientific, and educational purposes, disease or predation, the inadequacies of existing regulatory mechanisms, and we'll talk about that as it relates to the Maine Elver fishery in a moment, and then other natural or man-made factors affecting its continued existence. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is required to make a determination by September 2015. They are already 3 years late, which is typical for both NOAA Fisheries or National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service when they get to the point of having to make a final determination. They have 1 year to do it, and it's almost impossible because of all of the listing petitions that they receive from many other species. American eel populations, from my perspective, remain at a very low level relative to historic and prehistoric levels. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recognized that in their last listing petition, or last listing decision, excuse me, and recognized that eel abundance is low relative to historic levels. The box in gray is taken right out of the 2007 report that they did within their decision. Taken as a whole, a clear trend cannot be detected in species-wide abundance during recent decades, and while acknowledging that there have been large declines in abundance from prehistoric and historic times, we've determined the species currently appears stable. So all of the threats, that is the final outcome based on the review of all of the threats and based on their stock status review that and the stock status review was supplied to them by the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission, and then they expanded on it. The threats that they're looking at through the existing petition that they are trying to make a determination on include all of the past threats, and with a new focus on disease, although it looks like disease is less of an issue than was originally thought. But the big issue remains climate change. Everything that we deal with, specifically in the Gulf of Maine right now, all the problems, all of the, and some good things, frankly, if you look at lobster, are driven by climate change and changing water temperatures. And we're trying to make a determination if climate change is going to play a role with American eel. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about the Elver fishery. Before I do, the one thing that actually, I'm going to skip that because I'm going to hit a slide here in a minute. Let's talk about changes in the Maine Elver fishery. You've probably all seen this, but this is a great example of a fight net that you would see up and down the coast in May or June during the season. It's a very fine mesh net, almost like a mosquito netting. You see the floats on the top of the net to hold the net up at water level as the tide comes in. And then you can see that net funnels down to a cone-shaped ending, which is the cod end of the net, which would hold the Elvers in the cod end. There is an excluder panel within that net, right where it starts to cone down. The excluder panel is to keep out other species of fish. Specifically at the time, we were concerned about, in some rivers, sea-run trout, but specifically it was put in place to ensure that there was no bycatch of Atlantic salmon smolts, and that was part of a bigger conversation with the listing of Atlantic salmon in Maine. So why did we need to change? You probably all saw a lot of the reports in the news, especially from 2010, 11, 12, and 13, but skyrocketing values caused by increasing demand in China, Japan, and Korea. There was a lot of thought about the earthquakes and the loss of grow-out ponds within different areas of those countries, but the bigger issue was the demand. The demand was skyrocketing, and it was being driven by the fact that they were not getting eels from Europe anymore, and the Asian population of eels had also collapsed. So Maine, the U.S., but specifically Maine, became the big focus on where they could come to get eels. The price at $2,000 a pound in 2012 created huge black markets for this product, and I'll touch on that in a second. Poaching, because of the black market, poaching became a big issue. Poaching of Elvers, not just in Maine, but up and down the coast, specifically in the north, the northeast corridor, became a big problem for a lot of the other states and a big problem for the state of Maine. In 2013, we wrote 300 summonses. All of those, not all of them, a big portion of those were focused on poaching eels, dipping in fishways, fishing without a license, all of the issues associated with quick cash. We knew Maine law needed to change. We started to change it. We started to change it in a way that started to have meaning. We put very strict licensing requirements in place. Out of all of these 300 summonses, very few were actually licensed fishermen that were causing the problem. The issue, again, was unlicensed people who were poaching. But we knew we needed to change the law fast, and in the last legislative session, we made some very big changes within the fishery that were important to the species and important to the industry to save the industry. Here's what the biggest problem was. That is an Elver dealer with $250,000 in cash in his lap. Cash was driving the problems. It wasn't the harvesters that were licensed in this state. It was the black market associated with the cash. It was very easy for somebody to catch eels out of state, drive them to Maine, find a licensed dealer, find a licensed fisherman who wanted to get around some of the issues or get around some of his own ability not to harvest, grab a bucket of eels, walk into a dealer and sell it. There was no requirements in place other than you had to have a license to sell. And because there was a cash business, it was very easy for the dealers to say, I'm not going to report this, here's some cash, have a nice night. So those were the problems that started to build in 2010 and 2011. They existed in the past, but not nearly as prevalent in 2010 through 2012 and into 2013. In 2013, though, we were able to change the license, the law during the season to eliminate cash transactions. There was a big debate at the legislature on whether we could do that, whether it was constitutionally allowable. But at the end of the day, I reminded a panel of legislators that in order for them to run for office, in order for them to receive a donation, it had to be a check. So if it was a constitutional problem, how come it wasn't a problem for them? So we were able to get around that. So here's a snapshot of how you can see the escalating problem. In 2009, Maine harvested around just over about 5,200 pounds with a value of $519,000 with an average price of about $99 a pound. And if you go down, you look, 2010, over 3,000 pounds, almost $600,000 value, a price of $184 a pound on average. But then you start seeing the big jumps. In 2011, 8,500 pounds, worth $7.7 million. In 2012, 20,000 pounds, worth $39 million. That's what was reported. That's what was reported. Chances are that number could be twice as high as that. That's where we started saying, okay, we need to make big changes, we need to make them fast. We criminalized everything in this fishery. If a licensed fisherman or a non-licensed fisherman was caught breaking the law, they instantly, and they were found guilty, they are now a felon. The fines are a minimum $2,000 fine for about anything as far as a violation that you would find within the Elver fishery, both in law and in rule. In 2013, when we had that big spike, it became Maine's second most valuable fishery behind lobster. It is a huge shift in what was going on with eels. And again, it was being driven by that demand from overseas. So we had to do something fast in order to get this under control. And we passed two different laws last year. LD 1925 authorized me to create an individual fishing quota to stop the derby fishery and try to stop the flow of eels coming in from out of state. And this is a huge policy shift for the state of Maine. No other state fishery has an individual quota. And it was a big, for me personally, it was a big tug of war and kept me up at night, because the idea of taking a public resource and privatizing that public resource was very problematic. But I knew if we were going to in order to save the industry, that was something that we were going to need to do. So when we established it by rule, so it can change and go. If the price went down to back what it could have been, in the 20 years ago, the price might have been $15 a pound. Only a handful of people, a handful of the license holders would have even participated at $15 a pound. The die-hard fishermen who knew they had to maintain their markets overseas would have fished for $15 a pound. But a lot of people just kept their nets in their garage and decided to stay home and do other work. So we created a quota. We created a formula. We took the last 3 years. We averaged their best two landings, and then we reduced an individual's landings or their individual take by over almost 42%. So it was a very big hit to every individual fisherman, and something that was not well accepted, with the exception of the understanding that they knew, the industry as a whole knew they needed to do something. And nothing else was really put on the table, and this is where we ended up. There was a specific percentage of the overall quota is allocated to each of the 4 federally recognized tribes, so the legislature ended up allocating 21%, almost 22% of the total quota in 2014 to the tribes. That's another big shift. There was a lot of very contentious meetings with the tribes. At the end of the day, frankly, they being the Passamaquoddies, got about 95% of what they were hoping to get, other than having a little bit more flexibility. They didn't want to have to assign individual quotas. They wanted their own quota and allow people to harvest it from the tribe as they saw fit. But it became an equal protection issue under the Constitution, where we couldn't treat one population of people differently than another population of people. So at the end, the legislature determined that everybody was going to have to fish under an individual quota system. The other big thing that we did, first time ever in the state of Maine, and not many other states have done it, although a lot are looking at it, is the creation of a swipe card system. Several years ago, before we had to shut the shrimp fishery down, we started looking at the development of a swipe card fishery for the shrimp fishery to have stricter control on managing our quota, so we could shut it down in time and did not have to pay the overage back. So we dusted the concept off, and my staff, in a very short time, developed a swipe card system. So all license holders, between tribal and non-tribal, 949 of them, were required to appear in person to sign an affidavit saying they understood the law, that they understood what their personal quota was, and then they were issued their swipe card. All license holders were given, again, the summary of the law and how that transaction card or swipe card was going to work. The results of all of those law changes resulted in, I think, a benefit to the species and to the industry. 2013, there were, out of the 15 jurisdictions from Maine to Florida, including Potomac River Fishery, who sits on the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission, there were 6 confirmed votes to shut the Maine Elver fishery down. And it would have been a huge economic blow to the state of Maine. I don't think from a biological standpoint that the harvest of Elvers is detrimental, especially considering the fact that Maine gave up many, many years ago our silver eel fishery in order to maintain a small glacial fishery. So we had already dealt with our own silver eel fishery. The last management measures put in place already established the fact that all states will have to eliminate their silver eel fisheries now. So the harvest will be focused on the yellow eel fishery and on the glacial stage. And now we're going to be entering a lot of conversations over the next several months with the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission to deal with the current addendum that is being worked on. So in 2014, the individual quota established, the tribal and non-tribal quota minus the buffer was almost 12,000 pounds. The landings for 2014, we came in below our quota. The total landings were 9,585 pounds. That had an estimated value of $8 million. Big change from that $30 million that we posted several years ago, but still we're able to maintain a fishery at a very high level. And it's still much, much higher in value than it was when it was $15 a pound or even $100 a pound. Last year, there was a lot of people that have been saying that's because it wasn't $2,000 a pound last year. It was still $700 to $1,000 a pound. Still a lot of lure for people who want to try to break the law and bring eels to Maine. However, this year we only had 3 confirmed reports of people bringing eels into the state illegally to try to sell. Every one of those people were apprehended. Every one of those people were put in jail. Most of those people spent quite a long time in jail because they didn't have any cash to be able to bail themselves out. And I didn't mind, as a taxpayer, letting them sit there for a little while. And so it shows that the swipe card and the quota system had the effect that we wanted it to have. Now, the system's not perfect and it needs some tweaking, but we went from 300 summonses in 2013 to 17 last year. And that is with the same amount of enforcement effort. So big changes from the state's perspective in order to try to salvage this fishery. The enforcement and monitoring component that were established in law, again, the swipe card was put into place. Multiple IDs had to be available, both a license, a transaction card, and a photo ID to ensure that the people using those cards were in fact those people. The way the card worked is what everybody wanted was a system like a debit card. When you're out of money, it doesn't work anymore. When you're out of quota, it doesn't work anymore. We couldn't establish that system quick enough. So my feeling was, as a harvester, you have the responsibility to manage your quota. And the pounds range from 4 pounds to some individual up to just over 100 pounds for other individuals who had showed large landings over the years. That card, once they reached that quota, and that information was uploaded, because it was uploaded daily, our landings program was aware that somebody was over their limit or approaching their limit. And as soon as they went over their limit, it was shut off. One of the big changes in law that we were able to put in place that I'd like to see transitioned over to other fisheries is what's called pecuniary gain law. So if you went over your quota by 10 pounds and it was $1,000 a pound, and we can prove through an administrative hearing that yes, you went over your quota, and you have to pay that value of that overage back to the state of Maine. And that payback goes right back into eel, elver management, science, and enforcement. So this year, I'm sure we won't get it all. I ran a pecuniary gain hearing yesterday and found an individual guilty. That individual, the value of his eels were $7,000. We will never see that money, never see it. But he will also never fish for Elvers again because he won't be able to get his license. So it works 2 ways. There are a few bad apples in the industry, but for the most part, people that are in this industry understand that they need to maintain that level of a high level of standard to be able to maintain their license for the long run. The biological changes that we made were the 48-hour close period. We used to have that separated. We put that back together. So nets have to be, they can remain in the water, but they have to open the caught end, so no Elvers are caught from noon Friday to noon Sunday. We put a restriction on the St. Croix River to dip net only. Obviously, that's a border river, so there's no fishing on the Canadian side. The Passamaquoddy tribe has a lot of folks that fish that particular stretch of river, and they actually asked for this to be a dip net only area. We did delay the start of the season until April 6th instead of March 22nd. That delay was a natural delay anyway because of, if you don't remember, we had quite a winter last year. It's hard to believe it when you go outside, but that was a more of a natural delay anyway, and we had the full laws had not gone into effect, so we delayed the start of the season. A lot of focus on the dealers. Big part of the problem, probably the major part of the problem from a license standpoint, was some of the dealers that we had coming in. We attracted a lot of dealers from out of state that frankly were coming here for a quick buck. No other way around it. That picture I showed you was a prime example of that. So we created requirements for the dealer to use the DMR issued reporting equipment, that swipe card reader. That swipe card reader is property of the state of Maine, and if it was abused, I didn't need any more than an excuse that they were using it improperly to be able to take it away from them until they could show that they were going to report properly and use the equipment properly. The 24-hour sync that I talked about, uploading every 24 hours, dealers may be implemented. We were suspending. They have to report. They do the daily report, but they have to report weekly as well. And we were shutting dealers down for several days at a time because they were not keeping up with their reports. Didn't take long for them to all get in the swing of things to ensure that they could buy on the open days. Supplemental buyers have to keep running tallies. One of the problems where you've got trucks roaming up and down the coast buying eels, and you'd stop a truck and they would have 25 or 30 pounds of eels with no way to know where they came from. So we forced them to start keeping a running tally with the names and all of the receipts that have been collected, and they had to be in their possession. If they weren't, we seized the entire truckload of eels. And because the supplemental buyers continue to be a problem, they are going to be eliminated altogether. So if you're going to deal an eel dealer remain, you have to buy a fixed facility or lease a fixed facility so we can inspect it when needed. So Marine Patrol can inspect it when needed. All purchases went back to cash, to check only, no cash, and the permanent. One of the things that was interesting is these roving dealers were just dropping them off at a truck, and they were going out of state. And they were doing it in areas where we had very hard time understanding when, how, and where it was happening. So all of the Elvers that are caught must go back to a permanent facility before being shipped out of state. I touched quickly on the penalties. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. $2,000 fine, mandatory 1-year suspension for first offense. Second offense, your license is revoked permanently. So 2 strikes and you're out. Keeps a high level of compliance. Harvesters who sell more than their quota are paying back that restitution for pecuniary gain. Dealers who purchase Elvers without using the swipe card must pay restitution to the state equal to the value of that overage. And the collective overage by non-tribal license holders or by any of the by non-tribal license holders and by any of the 4 tribes is deducted for by the following year. We put a 5% buffer in to give us a cushion so we didn't have to pay back. But if there was an overage, if the swipe card system failed, we weren't able to monitor the fishery. If we did go over, there's a payback provision in place. So, kind of comes full circle back to what we're going to face in a few weeks in Alexandria, Virginia, when the Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission Eel Board meets to make final determinations on what the glass eel and yellow eel fisheries are going to look like with the minor changes. Most of the silver eel management measures are already put into place. Elvers will be the major focus, though. This has been a very high priority fishery, but we have shown through very swift action by the state legislature and by the administration that we can control this fishery to ensure that we can stop all of the illegal activities outside of the license holders. The draft addendum that is in place that they're out for public comment on right now, and there's been 2 public hearings in Maine, includes status quo, which is what I just showed you for the state of Maine. That quota and all of those provisions. The other thing, if we're going to maintain an eel fishery, is to move away from just a young of the year life cycle study to a full life cycle study, where we will have to monitor both the young of the year, the yellow eel, and the silver eel stage, life stages. So that's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is a complete closure of the fishery, either phased in or immediately. That's still, I know there are 2 states that are going to ask to have our fishery closed down. What's interesting from my perspective is there's very little focus on the yellow eels. If you think of a yellow eel living 10 to 20 or 30 years in the freshwater environment, they have mortality inflicted on them through commercial pressure year after year after year. Glass eel, the glass eel stage, when glass eels come in, is already a very, very high natural mortality. Some people say up to 95%. It's not known exactly, but if it ranged from 70 to 90%, and we're removing a very small amount from the entire coast, from Maine to Florida, I don't believe from a biological standpoint that we're going to jeopardize the species. The other component of that is we may be taking from a main river, but it's not affecting that river. Remember, they're not coming back to that river after they've been spawned and come back into the state system. An eel that may have grown up in the Penobscot River, have gone out as a silver eel and spawned, those juveniles from the end of the year from that spawn could be distributed from South America all the way to Greenland, depending on the tides and currents. So that's a big difference. There's been a lot of talk about having river-specific fisheries, but a river-specific fishery really doesn't work with this particular species. So potential additional big changes coming, but from our management, our position for future management will be to maintain the status quo for the Elver fishery. I'd like to see some additional quotas put in place on the yellow eel fishery and maintain the complete closure of the silver eel fishery to protect the spawning females that are going to be out migrating. So with that, that's all I have, and that's kind of a lot of work that's gone on in the last several years, and that's just kind of scratching the surface. If I could tell you stories about enforcement issues and some of the issues we've dealt with, I could be here for another couple hours. Some of the issues have been pretty amazing, but the poaching in particular has been. I suspended a fisherman's license who didn't have an eel license, but he had another license. I suspended that license. The only reason he was fishing for Elvers illegally was to fuel a drug habit. You have that type of extreme, and then you have the extreme of a gentleman sitting right here who is in the ground fishing industry, who obeys all the laws and obeys all the reporting, and this is a key piece of his annual income. And so you're maintaining the balance of protecting people in the industry who have been in it for many, many, many years versus people in it trying to make a quick buck and exploit the resource and drive the industry into the ground. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.